America. Thanks for your company.
In Thailand, scandals involving monks are threatening a crisis of faith.
Sex, drugs, money, and even murder.
What started as a sex scandal turned into something much bigger.
ทุกสืบสวนเนี่ยก็ตกใจว่า
One of the biggest cases of temple fraud in Thailand's history.
The situation is in crisis.
I'm about to go on patrol with the monk police.
How often do you find monks doing the wrong thing?
ก็ออกมาก็เป็นเจอ
Foreign Correspondent, Thursday at 8 on ABC and ABC iView. Critical questions.
Has a cold World War III already begun?
That's a very sharp question.
Frank opinions.
I shouldn't have to feel guilty about owning property.
Unfiltered voices.
Trump is a bully. The United States and Australia are not willing to go to war.
On the topics that matter to you.
Are we deploying technologies that we don't fully understand?
We have to talk about this. Please, get involved.
It can only be Q&A, Monday 9:35 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Textiles, toys, electronics. For the last 2 decades, the world has become accustomed to these carrying the label, Made in China. But there are new categories of China-made goods dominating in the global marketplace, and it is causing discomfort.
China is now simply too large for the rest of the world to absorb this enormous capacity.
The overcapacity debate has sparked intense discussion.
美国人他不相信你的制度比我更优越，不相信你的人比我更聪明，不相信你的教育比我更灵光，他接受不了中国在弯道超车这个事实，所以他只能去指责你 overcapacity。
Europe is also increasingly worried about the future of its high-tech industries.
Nous sommes à un moment critique entre le protectionnisme américain et le risque de voir arriver sur le marché européen des produits chinois à prix cassés.
When BYD is starting to sell more cars than BMW, that is going to pose problems for China and German relations.
Take the electric vehicle sector. It is a crucial industry for the clean economy with a huge potential in Europe. But global markets are now flooded with cheaper Chinese electric cars.
As Beijing tries to export its way out of an economic slowdown, what impact would it have on the rest of the world?
Let me tell you something to China. If you're listening, President Xi, those big monster car manufacturing plants that you're building in Mexico right now, and you think you're going to get that, you're going to not hire Americans, and you're going to sell the cars to us now. Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the country.
Globally, green capacity is not excessive, but in dire scarcity. The problem now is not overcapacity, but over-anxiety.
And just how did China develop such a formidable competitive edge in the 3 clean tech industries of EVs, solar panels, and lithium-ion batteries? On the 9th of April 2024, steel workers protested outside Chile's presidential palace to demand higher tariffs on Chinese steel imports. According to data from the Latin American Steel Association, in 2023, the region imported a record 10 million tons of Chinese steel, a 44% rise from the year before. Chinese steel is almost 40% cheaper than what's made locally.
Abrirle los ojos también al país entero, la problemática que estamos teniendo con China. China está abusando a todo el mundo y está destruyendo un montón de empresas en todo el mundo. Y eso es lo que queremos que se den cuenta de una por todas. Los chivatos están a morir justamente por eso. Y lo que no queremos es que 22.000 personas en la octava región del Biobío queden sin su sustento.
In 2024, Chile's biggest steel company announced it is shutting down. Data from the World Bank shows China is the top exporter of steel when measured by quantity. Chile, Mexico, South Africa, and Saudi Arabia have all taken action against China's steel exports. Concluding her visit to China in April 2024, U.S. Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen delivered these remarks.
China is now simply too large for the rest of the world to absorb this enormous capacity. Actions taken by the PRC today can shift world prices. And when the global market is flooded by artificially cheap Chinese products, the viability of American and other foreign firms is put into question.
According to Yellen, China makes more solar panels, batteries, and EVs than its domestic market can absorb.
It reflects Chinese policies that place great priority on these sectors, channel support to them, enable them to continue operating even when prices drop to very low levels due to overcapacity and their firms don't exit the market. Instead, it's potentially our firms that have to do so.
One day later, China refutes these claims.
在全球化的背景下，判断产能是否过剩，要从全球市场需求和未来发展潜力来看。供需平衡是相对的，不平衡往往是常态。解决这些问题，主要还要依靠市场按照价值规律进行调节。将产能等经贸问题泛政治化、泛安全化，违背经济规律。
We are committed.
At the end of April, Blinken again raised the issue.
Solar panels, electric vehicles, and the batteries that power them. China alone is producing more than 100% of global demand for these products, flooding markets, undermining competition, putting at risk livelihoods and businesses around the world.
In early May, it was French President Macron raising the same issue during President Xi's visit to France. In response, President Xi says overcapacity does not exist. Before going any further, it's important to recall a basic economic principle, the principle of comparative advantage, which says when country A can make goods cheaper because of reasons like low-cost operations, for example, that's their advantage and they should sell it to the world. Country B should find their own comparative advantage in goods they can make better, and then they should trade. That's been the key principle guiding global trade for the last 200 years. Ever since China entered the World Trade Organization in 2001, its share of global exports has been increasing. As this dataset from the United Nations shows, China's share of the global export of goods have been climbing exponentially the last 2 decades, making it the world's undisputed export champion. Around the same time, the United States lost more than 5 million manufacturing jobs, in part due to the growing trade deficit in manufactured goods with China, Japan, Mexico, and other countries. The U.S. trade deficit with China was the largest.
And what's really happened is that the China factor has accelerated a long-running trend of decreased manufacturing employment in the US. If we go back to the 1950s, 30% of the US workforce was in manufacturing. In the early 2000s, before China joined the WTO, that had already halved to 15%. So you can see these long-running trends of technology, automation, digitization, reducing manufacturing employment. And then China joins as well and accelerates this whole process. So you get a much faster loss of manufacturing jobs after China joins the WTO in 2001. And that shrinks to around 9% of total US employment, about 5 million jobs lost. I think what the China shock did is really accelerated a process that maybe would have taken 20 years normally, actually took place in around 10 years.
全球化最大的得益方是美国，是所有这个跨国公司的资本，他们在中国赚了很多钱，赚得盆满钵满，但是这些钱和利润呢，没有给他们本国的老百姓来进行分享。
Some economists refer to that first round of manufacturing job losses as the first China shock. When toys, textiles, glass, and all sorts of other straightforward manufacturing processes move to China, what US and some European leaders are concerned about is the beginning of a second China shock. And this time, it's not going to be in goods like these.
The second China shock could be even larger than the first. And I think what we've got now in China is an unprecedented combination of four things. The first is 30% share of global manufacturing. The second is relatively cheap wages, even now. The third, and this is key, advanced technological capacity. And then the fourth, massive, consistent, sustained state support for these sectors. The combination of those four factors is unprecedented in history. And with that, I think we're going to get a second China trade shock, this time at the advanced manufacturing products. And that's going to put a lot of pressure now onto Europe, to Japan, to South Korea, and even again pressure onto the US. So this is a new shock that is just really beginning and is going to ripple through over the next 4, 5, 10 years.
您如何看待第二次中国冲击理论？
他们这一次的这个冲击，主要是觉得，你中国就应该停留在这个全球价值链的中低端，你不能迈向中高端。对于美国人来讲，还有两个不好意思说的前提条件，就像华为出现了弯道超车以后，美国 National Interest 的一篇文章来反思这个问题，说中国不是搞自由资本主义啊，它的教育呢死记硬背可以的，高考可以的，但是说你搞原创，它不可能的，肯定是偷我的技术。但对欧洲呢情况不太一样，因为有一句话说，美国人不喜欢中国人，是因为中国的本身，你的出身啊，你的力量存在的本身，而欧洲人不喜欢中国人呢，是因为你的所作所为。所以欧洲人对中国电动汽车、对中国的这个所谓的第二次 shock 也有这个 shock， 但呢跟美国的 shock 是不太一样的。欧洲呢，它优越感是在于欧洲中心论啊，它已经散漫、浪漫、傲慢惯了。结果呢，现在中国的给他挤压的，让你也好好的工作，让你汽车行业让你要加班加点，让你他很烦人，这影响我的生活质量了。所以呢，这个抱怨跟美国呢是有点不太一样的，但都有不同程度的 shock。美国人他们不相信你的制度比我更优越，不相信你的人比我更聪明，不相信你的教育比我更灵光，这实际上就证明他们以前对中国是有偏见的。
Back in 2016, Trump ran an election campaign targeting China and won.
We can't continue to allow China to rape our country.
This time around, Trump is doing the same.
Let me tell you something to China. If you're listening, President Xi, those big monster car manufacturing plants that you're building in Mexico right now, and you think you're going to get that, you're going to not hire Americans, and you're going to sell the cars to us. No, we're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it.
In Europe, similar concerns have arisen.
Nous sommes à un moment critique entre le protectionnisme américain et le risque de voir arriver sur le marché européen des produits chinois à prix cassés.
Chinese automaker BYD has a lot to celebrate. In 2023, it became the world's biggest electric vehicle or EV seller, a title it claimed from US company Tesla. Those results forced Tesla to slash prices of its cars across the globe. In first quarter 2024, Tesla emerged tops again. But the competition between Tesla and BYD continues to be intense.
You come to auto show and you see all of the traffic at the Chinese automakers booths. I was at the Audi booth, and one of my favorite beautiful cars, the e-tron, the RS e-tron. And it took me less than 10 seconds to wait for somebody, and then I got in it myself. And then you go over to Zeekr, and they have just launched a Zeekr X, which is a small little car that I think is gonna be less than 300,000 RMB, or less than $40,000 in the China market. I waited 10 minutes for this little car because there were so many people that wanted to see it. And so the management of these European automakers also saw this, and then in disbelief, they got into the vehicles themselves. They closed the door, they heard the sound, you know, that matches what they're traditionally able to do, and then looked at the technology on the instrument panel and the infotainment system, and jaws were dropped. I think there's a lot of disbelief, a lot of shock, but a bit of fear. You know, director level, manager level, now they touch, feel, see these cars, and they're like, wow, we are in trouble.
China's EV dreams stretches back to 1992, when prominent China scientist Chen Shuesen asked the government to start work on EVs.
我们几十年以前就在布局。如果你去查钱学森，大家知道我们是两弹一星的，当时他就觉得传统上的汽车我们竞争不过西方发达国家，我们能不能将来搞电动汽车？那个是个概念。但是到了90年代的时候徐冠华。万钢他们从德国回来，就开始，因为他们在德国工作研发这个，他觉得这个就是一条弯道超车的老路，一条新路吧。那个就是开始搞电动汽车。中国人一旦谋定这件事情，他久久为功，举国体制，就把这个事情做大了。所以就像我们英语说一句话一样的 ，If you believe, you can achieve.
The Chinese government played a pivotal role in developing the EV industry.
When assessing state support in China, it's important to note that you could call China a mobilization state. So when you have this objective of developing EVs or a Made in China 2025, it's not as simple as just one-off subsidies. It's a whole effort that the party state gets behind. You have cheap lending, partly funded by the PBOC. You have local governments providing land and utility deals. The Trade Ministry puts restrictions on competitor products being imported into China. And then even the retail investors, they see a policy signal and they're going to pile into the equities of these companies and provide with cheap financing. So it's really a whole system approach to developing and supporting these sectors. It's one that's consistently carried out for a number of years. And in the specific case of EVs, I'll highlight a couple of policies that were really crucial. It was, number one, cheap funding, both for the firms themselves, but also their prospective buyers, the households purchasing these vehicles. And the other one was the tax rebates and the ease of buying these vehicles, particularly in the big cities where license plates are rationed and quite scarce.
It is no secret that government subsidies were crucial to the growth of Chinese EV companies. XPeng, for example, depended on a state-owned enterprise near Guangzhou to lend it over $200 million in 2017 for the construction of its initial factory. Then, the city of Wuhan helped XPeng buy land and borrow money at low interest rates for a new plant there. Now, XPeng is not only making EVs, but also pushing out cars straight out of science fiction movies. This is XPeng's electric flying car. The vehicle will first be sold in China for more than 1 million yuan, or $140,000 US. The company says buyers should be able to fly the EV in designated trial areas. In February 2021, China introduced the concept of a low-altitude economy into its national planning. Economists concerned about a second China shock often point to the forces of state planning, government subsidies, and company innovation. These flying EVs are a case in point. Governments elsewhere are pushing back.
Take the electric vehicle sector. It is a crucial industry for the clean economy with a huge potential in Europe. But global markets are now flooded with cheaper Chinese electric cars. And their price is kept artificially low by huge state subsidies. This is distorting our market. So I can announce today that the Commission is launching an anti-subsidy investigation into electric vehicles coming from China.
他用了一个词叫 overcapacity， 就是产能过剩。这个词呢，用这个词有2个前提条件。第一，他不承认中国的市场经济地位，他觉得如果按照市场原则，你不应该出现那么多的过剩的。但中国实际上呢，你就过剩了。中国现在要实现到2030年、2035年、2040年碳排放，到峰值和碳中和，你不搞电动汽车搞什么呀？你不可能实现联合国这些SDG 的这样一个目标的。所以它相对于中国的需求来讲，它不是过剩的，这是第一。相对于世界层面来讲，那更不是过剩。只是他们说你占的比例太多了，你占60-70%了啊！汽车行业，尤其像德国啊、在欧洲啊，包括美国，它现在就衰落了，它接受不了中国在弯道超车这个事实，所以它只能就指责你 overcapacity， 尤其是美国选举年，不是我不行啊，是他乱搞啊，他没有违反市场原则。
The auto industry in Europe is a major employer, and jobs are a major hot-button issue when it comes to elections in Europe. In February 2023, car maker Ford said it will axe 4,000 jobs in Europe. In June 2023, Swedish car parts manufacturer Autoliv said it will cut 8,000 jobs. The same month, car maker Stellantis announced it planned to close its plant in Austria after 40 years, impacting 300 jobs. In October, Germany's Volkswagen cut 2,000 jobs. And the following month, French tire maker Michelin said it will cease operations at 3 factories in Germany by end of 2025, affecting over 1,500 jobs.
The auto industry is a huge part of the European economy. Its turnover is about 7 times Europe's GDP, the European Union that is. It employs directly and indirectly about 13 million people. That's 6% of total EU employment. And also psychologically, it's a big part of the history of industrial development within Europe. So it's a massive part of the economy. And they are quite rightly worried of Chinese competition, both within Europe and globally.
On the 10th of April 2024, the European Commission put out a 700-page document outlining details of what they say are distortions in the Chinese market.
Do you think that we will see a trade war emerge between Europe and China, like what we've seen between China and the US?
I think trade friction is inevitable. That is guaranteed. We can see it happening already. An outright trade war, I think, is less likely, mainly for 2 factors. The first is somewhat ideological. Europe is an open economy. It has to trade to survive. So it's less willing than the US, which is almost self-sufficient in many cases, to be isolationist. So Europe needs to stay open. It needs to trade. The second factor is, although pressure is coming from China, it is still the largest market for many European companies, for luxury goods, for vehicles, for industrial products. These European companies rely on China for a lot of revenue, a lot of profits that are reinvested within Europe. So So that dependency is there to a much greater extent than what we saw in America.
您是否担心欧洲和中国之间会出现贸易战？那就像我们所看到的中国和美国之间发生这种贸易战一样。
部分的或者短期内的技术层面上的贸易战是有可能的，但是像中美这样的系统性的、长久的、激烈的这种贸易战，我觉得不大可能，因为欧洲和美国的体制不一样。因为欧盟它不是一个国家，它是27个国家组成的，大量的国家还是希望跟中国做生意的。第二个来讲呢，就是欧洲呢，它只能更多的征收关税，做反补贴啊，征收关税，它的手段没有美国那么大棒那么多。美国刚才讲，美国金融霸权，动不动把这个踢出 SWIFT 系统，欧洲没那么多制裁手段。我们现在说了一句话说，放眼全球，只要中欧合作，那么这个阵营对抗就搞不起来。只要中欧坚持互利共赢，那么逆全球化就不会得势。也就是说，政治多极化和经济全球化里边，欧盟是中国现在重点争取的对象。
Across rural China, in even the most remote parts of the country, solar panels could be seen to dot the landscape. In China's cities, solar panels are also spread across rooftops, and they're even on building facades. China installed a record 217 gigawatts of solar panels in 2023. That's more than what the US has ever built in its entire history, and more than in any other country.
是什么推动了中国太阳能产业的成功呢？
就是习主席说的那句话，现在已经是广为人知了，叫“绿水青山就是金山银山”。所以中国人对这个碳排放的减少，我们是认真的，就是中央认定了这个事儿，那接下来就是一层层要落实的。中国中央党强有力的领导，中国有500多万个基层的党组织，我们所有的省市自治区、直辖市到县级，一直到乡啊村都要贯彻落实。如果你没有实现这个目标，马上乌纱帽给你摘掉。以前是强调 GDP， 只要能把 GDP 搞上去，你就可以升官发财。那今天你搞上去没有用，你首先要搞你质量。
One of the key reasons why solar production and installation is so high in China is because the economy has been weak. Now, Xi Jinping is trying to shift the economy away from the old growth model, relying on property, infrastructure, high debt, towards something a bit more advanced manufacturing, new technology, some more on the export side. And so when COVID hit and the property crash came over the past couple of years in China, instead of pulling the old stimulus levers, which were build roads, build more houses, China really went all out on these advanced manufacturing sectors. So lending and investment by those sectors up around 20% year over year for the past couple of years. And a lot of that has come from the solar side. And so because the economy is weak, they're getting more subsidies, more pressure to produce, and that is driving installation.
Over the last 3 decades, industrial policy, state subsidies, innovation, intense competition, and economies of scale have propelled Chinese solar companies to a level of global competitiveness that few others elsewhere can rival. Today, China dominates the global solar sector. In 2021, Chinese companies account for more than 80% of the global market at every stage of the manufacturing process, according to the International Energy Agency. In the shadow of their success, hundreds of solar companies in the US and Europe declared bankruptcy.
We have not forgotten how China's unfair trade practices affected our solar industry. Many young businesses were pushed out by heavily subsidized Chinese competitors. Pioneering companies had to file for bankruptcies. Promising talents went searching for fortune abroad. This is why fairness in the global economy is so important, because it affects lives and livelihoods.
Hi, my name is Joe Mornville. I'm the president of Energy Independent Solutions. We do a wide mix of anything solar. Price of solar, I mean, when we started in the business, it was around $3 a watt for a module. And now, you know, a decent module, you're getting at under 50 cents. It's like a, 1/8 the price or something.
The U.S. was once a stronghold of solar module manufacturing, accounting for around a quarter of global solar module shipments in the early 2000s. But that started changing around 2010.
We stayed American-made up until maybe 2012, 2014, when we could no longer buy the product anymore because at that point, China had driven most of the companies into bankruptcy, most of the U.S. companies into bankruptcy at that point. Actually testified in the trade case in Washington for it. China basically subsidizes at their production level. So their product is coming off of the line before it goes into a container already carrying subsidy.
U.S. solar manufacturers were going broke, but the overall industry was growing fast. People found employment selling and installing the China solar modules.
Well, couldn't compete head-to-head with China, but it kind of improved the whole market. Everybody started to really step up to the plate. And then the financials started to make sense. It just started to steamroll from that point.
Helped by cheap imports, solar installations soared in the 2010s, peaking in 2016 before Trump got elected, and plunging after Trump slapped huge tariffs on China's solar imports.
No more tariffs on the sun! Solar jobs for everyone! No more tariffs on the sun! Solar jobs for everyone! No more tariffs on the sun!
China solar modules were slapped with a 30% tariff under Trump's trade war.
We're out here to fight against the solar tariffs that the Trump administration has imposed. We want to make sure that those don't hurt American workers in this growing industry. Solar's growing, we don't want to stop the growth.
Solar tariffs have to go! Hey, hey!
The U.S. and China, they need to get politics out of the way and start looking at the good of the human race.
When President Biden was elected, solar installations soared again. The U.S. continued to import solar panels, but this time mainly from Southeast Asia, where many Chinese solar companies set up new factories to avoid the tariffs. The U.S. has also been trying to rebuild its solar manufacturing industry. Factories that were shuttered from Chinese competition are reopening again. They are doing so because of generous subsidies from the Inflation Reduction Act, which channels $430 billion to clean energy industries.
Now, the US is also trying to build its solar industry using subsidies from the immense Inflation Reduction Act. By subsidizing American industries at this scale, isn't the US doing exactly what China is doing?
Yeah, the US is going back to industrial policy. It's a little bit ironic considering they're criticizing China's model of doing things, but they are moving back there and doing it themselves. The big difference is that they've lost the capacity to do so. Industrial policy was heavily opposed in Washington for years and years and years. Trying to go back to do that is very difficult. They've lost the know-how of carrying out big, effective industrial policy programs.
Yeah, exactly on that point, right? Could there be a risk of over-subsidizing an industry that might not be competitive globally and may not be sustainable in the long run?
Yes, that certainly is a real risk. And to do industrial policy effectively, it needs to have a clear goal, picking the right sector, and be sustained and sufficiently large enough over a long period of time to develop that industrial competitiveness within a domestic economy. Now, the US can do that. The market's large enough. They have the financial resources. But the question is also around political willpower. If a new president comes in, will they continue with this industrial policy push?
那明年假如说特朗普回来，他说气候变化这是忽悠人的，巴黎气候变化协定他重新退，那美国的政策能不能保持连续性呢？这是一个大大的问号。另外呢，他的盟友尤其是欧洲怨声载道，你这个补贴直接给你补贴的美国的这种新能源的这种项目，你直接是挤压了欧洲的 何况现在俄乌冲突还在继续，等等吧。
Globally, green capacity is not excessive, but in dire scarcity. The problem now is not overcapacity, but over-anxiety. Calling for stronger climate response on the one hand and erecting green trade barriers on the other would only raise the costs for one's own low-carbon transition and also slow down the global development of clean energy.
We are committed to...
As Blinken raises the issue of overcapacity in the solar industry, China focuses on new markets for its clean tech exports. Its aim, the Global South. Fast-growing, populous, energy-hungry parts of the world who are trying to transit to clean energy as soon as they can. Currently, there are 745 million people in the world who still do not have access to electricity.
世界上那么多国家，它没有电，还缺电，没有享受到全球化带来的好处，这是不公正的。所以我们必须要让他们通上电，这是我们的理想。
Europe and Asia were the largest export markets for China's solar companies in 2023, with Europe forming 48% of all China's solar exports and Asia making up 23%. As debates continue around whether or not China's solar industry is facing overcapacity, a new trade complaint is lodged, this time in wind farms. The EU is investigating China's involvement in wind parks in Spain, Greece, France, Romania, and Bulgaria. Last year, the EU imported some $1.42 billion worth in turbines and components from China.
So the wind power industry is an interesting one. It's an area where the EU is still competitive and where there is quite a lot of advantages in terms of localized production. So shipping those big turbine blades, it's very difficult. They are massive now. They're getting bigger and bigger. Transporting them from, say, China to Europe is very costly, very difficult. So by moving early, the hope is that the EU will maintain this competitive edge it has within wind power production. And I think that's the goal of these early stage investigations.
Electric vehicles, solar panels, and lithium-ion batteries. These are the three industries in which China exports dominate the global market. Debates have erupted over whether or not China has overcapacity in these three areas. Just how did China come to dominate the global battery industry? The answer lies far outside China's borders. Here in Zimbabwe, in Africa, Chinese company Zhejiang Huayu Cobalt Company broke ground on a new lithium mine in July 2023. Here at the opening ceremony is the president of Zimbabwe, a sign of the importance of this investment. Zhejiang Huayu Cobalt Company is a market leader in battery manufacturing and has been investing in mines across Africa. Over in South America, in the remote salt flats of Bolivia, Chinese company CATL announced in 2023 that it will invest more than $1 billion here to produce lithium carbonate used in battery production. Over in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, Chinese companies also dominate the supply chain. Indonesia has the world's largest reserves of nickel. And Tsingshan Holding Group, the world's top nickel producer, has been operating here in Indonesia for close to 2 decades, long before nickel became a critical component in the making of batteries. According to the IEA, China processes more than half of the world's lithium, along with other crucial battery materials. How did Chinese mining companies get such a foothold across different parts of the world?
他们的优势刚才讲就是原材料的优势。那么他怎么样把原材料这个一招鲜吃遍天，把它那个变成一个生产的优势？现在中国提出的一带一路和非盟2063的计划进行对接的一个口号是什么？叫 Made in Africa with China for the world。什么意思呢？就是我们现在很多的锂电池的加工，它不光是在中国，它可能就在非洲。然后呢，非洲现在很多产业园区引进中国的，所以他说我把我的原材料、矿石也好跟你合作，然后中国的加工，然后呢带动他们的产业的发展，带动他们的就业，然后呢实现他们变成小的世界工厂、小的区域制造中心和摆脱过去简单的提供原材料这样一个不公平的一个竞争模式，这才是中国帮助它实现产业化最大的这个优势所在。
Back in China, the battery supply chain is supported with careful state planning. This is Suining in Sichuan, a city with a population of about 2.8 million people. And all the companies on the main street of Suining work on just one product: lithium batteries. Here, they make the cells, the batteries, and they even recycle the batteries. All of this happened by government design. The local government office selects the companies that complements the industrial chain they want.
通过链式的思维，我们现在是要对链条上我们的短板弱项进行一个补齐。
Those battery components made in Suining support the operations of CATL, the world's largest battery maker. CATL has a plant in neighboring city Yibin. Again, a result of industrial policy.
我们希望从产业的招引、产业的培育，一直到企业服务，来在一个办公室为他们来解决落实好。
The result of these coordinated efforts, from mining overseas to carefully planned supply chains, is a battery production process that is unrivaled in the world. China's battery makers have achieved unimaginable economies of scale in just over a decade. Today, more than 3/4 of lithium-ion batteries are made in China, and mainly by just two firms, CATL and BYD. The US and Europe have both taken steps in recent years to build up their domestic battery industries. The price tag for self-reliance will not be cheap. BNEF data suggests that Europe and US would need to spend $98 billion and $82 billion, respectively, on growing a local battery industry. Whether in simple toys, homeware, party accessories, or in high-tech arena of batteries, solar panels, and electric vehicles, China has managed to achieve comparative advantage in all these industries and more. Seen in the context of its long history, it is a moment of reckoning.
近代以后，中国逐步成为半殖民地、半封建社会，饱受列强欺凌，四分五裂，战乱频繁，生灵涂炭之苦。中华民族迎来了从站起来、富起来到强起来的伟大飞跃。中华民族伟大复兴进入了不可逆转的历史进程。
I think the second China trade shock is just beginning. We've had a big change in perception of China trade, driven by three major events: COVID, Trump trade war, Russia-Ukraine. So the perceptions have changed, but we're only now starting to see the real economic effects in terms of investment decisions, trade flows, higher inflation, the rerouting of the global supply chain. That's only just getting started, and with that will come much more trade friction in the months ahead. So really only the very beginning of the economic impact and the start of a new set of trade disputes.
Tonight, VP pick Kamala Harris believed to have chosen Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. Border Protection intercept at least 4 boats in the far north of WA in the past 24 hours. Out Fox, Noemi secures gold of her own with big sister Jess by her side to celebrate.
And coming up on the business, a hawkish hold from the Reserve Bank with a warning not to expect a near-term rate cut.
Hello, you're watching ABC Late News with me, Jade Barker. First, the Associated Press and multiple US outlets are reporting that